Good evening from Paris. In half an hour from now, the French election campaign is officially over. By law, no party message can be broadcast, no new polls can be published. The end of the first round of an election at the most fraught of times. The killing of a policeman last night has added to the sense of unease and divided the candidates.
Ne cédez rien à la peur.
The poll leader, Emmanuel Macron, says no one should be trying to score political points out of the shooting. We'll ask the Front National's campaign coordinator why Marine Le Pen has been doing that. And we journey deep into the heart of France.
But it says here that this monument symbolises the centre of gravity of continental France.
Meanwhile, here at home in our election campaign, Theresa May made a commitment on foreign aid that could anger her base.
Well, let's be clear, the 0.7% commitment remains and will remain. What we need to do, though, is to look at how that money is spent and make sure that we are able to spend that money in the most effective way.
Together, it's a bear.
Jeremy Corbyn has been telling Labour's story on the trail.
Frightened of the bear? This big bear looks frightened of the dog.
Party political pledges are being made. How much more than Brexit will determine what this election comes down to.
Hello, it's a mild evening in Paris as it counts down to an election that promises change whoever wins. It's hugely consequential for the EU, for Brexit and for the people here. Today, the last day of the campaign was of course overshadowed by the killing of a police officer last night, just a few hundred metres from here. Be clear, this has not been the same sort of shock as previous incidents, not at all. Life has been pretty normal today, but it has affected the election campaign. The fact that the killer, named today as Karim Cherfi, was known to the authorities, had been in jail before and had previously attacked a police officer, well, it obviously became an election issue. Does that benefit the candidates of the right? Two of them made an argument that they would be tougher on terrorism today, earning a rebuke from the current Prime Minister. What we know, though, is that we already have an unprecedentedly nail-biting contest. No voters anywhere are getting as wide a range of credible winners as here. Populist right, populist left, traditional conservative and centralist liberalism, any of the top four candidates could make it through to the second round runoff. Paris in spring. Here's the Arc de Triomphe's little brother. It celebrates Napoleon's victories, but harks back to a time when the country was divided between conservative royalists and liberals inspired by the French Revolution. And France has divisions today that are all coming to a head in an election that is in effect a four-horse race. You've heard of Marine Le Pen, tough on law and order and immigrants. She was quick to judgment on yesterday's killing.
For 10 years, under governments of right and left, everything has been done to ensure we lose this war. We need a presidency that acts and that protects.
And here's a rival, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Anti-elite, anti-globalisation and Eurosceptic and anti-NATO. He's on the left and has a canny sense of technology and theatre.
À Lyon.
I'm in Lyon.
Et maintenant,
And now,
à Paris.
in Paris.
It's easy to imagine voters switching between Mélenchon and Le Pen, because even though they're so far apart on many things, they're on the same side of the great divide. Are you mad as hell and want to change everything? Now, one unlikely outcome on Sunday evening is that the two of them go through to the final runoff. Unlikely because they're actually fighting over some of the same voters. But were that to happen, well, it would be a Brexit moment for France, it would be a nightmare for the European Union, and it would be a good time to sell any euro currency that you might have. That's what the other top candidates are trying to stop. Also promising change Emmanuel Macron is leading in the polls, centrist, a social and economic liberal. And yesterday he secured the Obama vote.
Hello,
Hello, Mr. President. How are you?
it's Emmanuel.
Yeah. Exactly.
Well, I'm doing very well.
But he's young, untried, and he worked in banking. Fortunately for Macron, his conservative rival François Fillon has worse scandals against him than that, and has struggled to change the subject.
C'est pas la justice que l'on cherche.
It's not justice they want, it's to break me. And not just me, it's the right they want to break.
Lui voler son vote.
The polls say of the four, Marine Le Pen and Macron are most likely to go through. But are they right?
What is most striking in this election is that one of the two favorite candidates, and that's Emmanuel Macron, he gained ground and is now better than he was, but he still has a proportion of voters that are not sure that their choice is definitive, that they will go and vote for him.
But Marine Le Pen's voters, are they not more committed?
Yeah, that's one of the characteristics of Front National voters, and we've seen that across many elections.
When you look at the outsider candidates, Mélenchon, Le Pen, 6 of the fringe candidates we never talk about, but whose posters bespoil this otherwise beautiful city, they're radical in their own way. Now take all of them together, their totals in the opinion polls come to almost exactly 50%. And what that implies is this country is almost evenly divided between those who want to overthrow the system and those who want to adapt it. And that's why one really natural outcome would be for a final showdown between the two torchbearers of those sentiments, Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron. He is expected to be the next president in 2 weeks, but no one can be sure. Spring is the best time to be in Paris, everyone knows that, and this is a spring that promises to be like no other. Well, the French polls are all talked about. They're rather interesting, by the way. They've been clustering together and remarkably consistent, which either gives you the confidence to believe their predictions are reliable or that the pollsters have some sort of flawed groupthink. We'll know on Sunday. But I don't think there has been a poll since February that has not made Emmanuel Macron the next president. So to learn more about him, I spoke last night to Benjamin Griveaux, the main spokesman of his party, En Marche, and I began by asking him who he wanted to come second.
You know, French voters will decide who will be our opponent, but if we follow the polls, it should be Marine Le Pen. She's leading every poll since 2 years now, and even if the polls are not that good for her right now, she is still a very strong competitor.
Populism in France, and it's difficult to define, but we kind of know what we're talking about when we use the term. You have Marine Le Pen, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, you've got another 7 or 8 candidates who you would describe as in the same vein as one of those two. Their support adds up to 50%, half the French population, doesn't it? Why is that?
The main issue, I think, is unemployment. We have a 10% rate of unemployment in France. We have 9 million people under the poverty level right now, and people just want to get rid of them, want to get rid of the usual solution that the Conservative and the Labour Party in France proposed to them since 30 years.
And those two main parties, we should remind everybody, are doing very badly in the polls when it comes to this particular election. But your candidate, Emmanuel Macron, is painting himself as the change candidate. Your candidate, the change candidate, has worked for the Rothschilds, and he's worked for François Hollande. I mean, this guy can't exactly say,
He went to the top French school, of course, so he knows the system from inside. What he did, and he took a huge risk when he launched his movement. I mean, nobody had never done that before in France. Because usually, if you want to run for president, you start by being a congressman for 10 years or 15 years. You find a territory where you can be elected, where people vote for you as a mayor, then for you as a congressman, or maybe as a senator. Then you are allowed to run for president.
Should the British be scared of Macron winning this election? Because he is not. He is the most pro-European of the major candidates, and to some extent maybe the least sympathetic to a country that is trying to negotiate its withdrawal.
He visited Theresa May in last February, and he respects the votes of the British people. And as your Prime Minister says, Brexit means Brexit. So you need to have not a punitive approach of Brexit for sure, but a responsible and a clear one.
A responsible and a clear one. But obviously what we want, or what the British are seeking in these negotiations, is kind of access to bits of the single market and the customs union. Is that?
Well, to access the single market, you need to have a full freedom of movement,
right,
and you need to pay a financial contribution to the EU budget. These are the two basic rules. And so
that, I think, is telling me that you are going to be quite hard on the British.
We can work.
It's exactly the answer that
we can work on, of course, long-term agreements with the UK. I mean, France and UK remains two close friends, and we will have to work probably on strategic issues and defense, intelligence matters.
I did want to just finish on security. Clearly, another incident in Paris. Does that play? Do you think it has an effect on the election? An election in which people are feeling scared of change, potentially feeling that the country is in the wrong direction. Do you think when there are attacks of any kind, it plays to Marine Le Pen?
I mean, of course it takes a certain place in this election. Of course, we all have in mind these images of Nice on the 14th of July and so on. But I think that when you have a responsible agenda on terrorism, French people are also responsible people. They don't want their liberties, their civil rights to be abolished in the name of fighting terrorism or so on. We are very much attached to our liberties and our civil rights.
Benjamin Griveaux, thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's the Macron view there. We're joined now by Jean Messiha, who is project coordinator for Marine Le Pen's Front National presidential campaign. Very good evening to you.
Good evening.
Your candidate did make politics of the murder of a policeman yesterday, didn't she?
I would not say that. I think Marine Le Pen has been talking about this risk and this threat for months and years now, and she was the only candidate to talk about that. The only candidate also to ask for steps.
She's the only candidate to have talked about terrorism?
Yes, in this campaign she is the only candidate to have talked about terrorism, about the risk of terrorism, and also the only candidate to have asked the actual
do you think it's appropriate
power.
The day after, before a policeman is buried, to go out and make a highly divisive speech?
It is not
at a time when the country is... It was a very divisive speech.
It is not a divisive speech.
She blamed the left and right.
She
blamed the politicians.
Yes, exactly, because we believe that all what happened during the past years in the terrorist field could have been avoided if serious steps would have been taken to tackle them.
She mentioned some steps today, which were essentially about deporting people who were foreign and were being investigated.
The blacklisted people,
and people who had binationality.
Yes, the blacklisted people.
How would that have helped in the case of yesterday? Karim Cherfi, how would that have helped? He was born in northeast Paris, near here. How would that have helped?
No, he was followed actually by the police.
How would it have helped to deport?
He was condemned to prison, and he was liberated before his time.
How would talking about deporting people have helped in this case of a man born in Paris, just outside Paris?
No, in this case it is not deporting people. In this case it is a laxist judicial power. It is the laxism of the court that has liberated him before his time of custody.
So I want to be clear, it would not have helped in this case. So why mention it this morning? It is precisely the point that it is divisive to do so.
No, because she was talking not only about this specific case, she was talking in global, in all the attacks that hit France during the past 2 years.
It is divisive to talk about deporting foreigners on the day that a Frenchman of a different...
It is not deporting foreigners. We have 10,000 people who are blacklisted for security reasons and links to terrorism. So all of those who are foreigners must be deported, The other ones who are binational must be taken off the French nationality.
And the French ones will stay here and be treated in prison.
The French one, we have an article in our law that allow us to imprison them.
Okay. Now, in her comments today, Marine Le Pen said the left and the right have been doing everything to lose the battle against terrorism.
That's exactly.
Why
that's
did
true.
Marine Le Pen, in the European Parliament, on the 14th of April last year, vote against measures to introduce passenger name records in European flights? It is the first thing that the governments of Europe say you need to do in order to protect the public.
No, because
passenger name records. She voted against it.
We are attached to individual and public liberties, and the PNR.
Right. What right has she got to say that everyone else is doing everything they can to lose it?
No, this measure you are talking about.
Let me answer. Agree with it, but the truth is they took a measure that is something they all want to do.
Let me answer you. This you are mentioning the PNR. PNR is a measure where all the passenger records must be gathered and transmitted to the United States, for example, agencies. We are very attached to individual liberties, and it is not because we are fighting terrorism that we are gonna threaten the individual liberties.
Do you think if Marine Le Pen wins, the bookies are putting about a 20% chance on that, do you think
that's
she
not
can
what
heal,
your bookmakers are saying?
Do you think she can heal the divisions in this country, or do you think she will stir up those divisions?
She is the only one who can heal the division in this country, because she is the only one to call for authorities and authority back in the street of Paris. And the state must use its authority to restore the state power in the streets. And if the state is feeble, in this case, you will have massive terrorist attacks, more and more in quantity and in number of deaths. And this time there will be civil war.
Jean Messer, thanks for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Well, much of the attention of this election has been on Paris and other large metropolitan areas where the issues of terrorism and immigration have been felt most keenly. But it's outside the capital that this election will really be decided. Gabriel Gatehouse has gone in search of France's political and geographic heart, where 3 different villages compete to call themselves the centre of the country.
Far from the tensions of the big cities, it is here that the presidential election could be decided. We're on a journey into the heart of the country, for it is here, in the Cher region, that 3 small villages vie for the coveted title of the geographic centre of France. First stop, Verdun. Well, this all looks terribly scientific. We've got lines and distances and calculations, a key for the different colours. I don't really know what it all means, but it says here that this monument symbolises the centre of gravity of continental France, not taking into account relief and excluding all islands. We're not the first to try to pinpoint what they call la France profonde, deep France. The majority of French voters live in provincial or rural communities. And yet, Gilles Pointerot, the mayor of Verdun, says people here feel ignored by the whole political class.
Les plus gros problèmes sur la commune de Verdun, c'est le vieillissement donc, de la population, des gens qui sont de plus en plus âgés. Donc il n'y a pas de jeunes qui s'installent. Il y avait bien avant des agriculteurs qui reprenaient les exploitations agricoles, mais bon, c'est de moins en moins le cas.
Vous êtes le centre géographique,
oui.
Et le centre politique?
Non, le centre politique à Verdun.
Politically, he says, Verdun is divided, half on the left, half on the right. There is an ongoing battle here to salvage a vanishing way of life. For many, like Sarah Nizoli, a promise to put French people first can be a tempting message.
Donc après, on a chacun nos problèmes. Je pense même s'ils sont en guerre dans leur pays, je suis quand même tout cœur avec eux par rapport à la guerre, mais je veux dire par rapport à ce qui est hébergement, aide, ils ont plus d'aide que les SDF qui meurent de froid.
Sound familiar? The issues that fueled Brexit and Trump are at work in France as well. This region is a bellwether. As the Cher votes, so does the nation. And so, our search for the geographical heart of France continues. Next stop, Saulzay-le-Potier. It says here that This ought to be the geographical centre of France, according to the calculations of the eminent mathematician and astronomer, the abbot Théophile Moreau. Here, they've got the church on their side.
Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.
Saulzay's claim predates that of rival Verdun. Buying sausages in the central square, we meet the oldest resident of the village. Madame Vuchkovich, 94 years old, was in the French resistance. She ought to know a thing or two about defending the country's interests.
C'est d'avoir un président vraiment capable.
Oui. We need a president who's up to the job, she says.
Évidemment, le centre n'a pas été gâté.
The centre has been ignored, her daughter tells me.
Mais là, il semble que la base commence à bouger.
But now, she adds, deep France is stirring. Saulzay is ploughing its ever-dwindling pot of central government money into renovating local businesses. In this way, Mayor Gérard Cardonnel tells me they hope to avoid the fate of La France profonde.
On appréhende les 10-20 ans à venir. Et on ne voudrait pas que nos communes viennent à mourir. Je crois qu'il faut aujourd'hui que nos élus prennent conscience qu'on est là, on existe et on doit être aidés.
Our search for the heart of France takes us to our final contender, Bruyères-Alichamps, where they have a claim that is perhaps even stronger than science or the church. They've got tradition. This is a 3rd century Roman milestone. It was moved to this ancient crossroads in 1799, and it says here that by tradition, this spot is designated as the centre of France. At the bistro at the centre of France, Mayor Patrick Siajolo is doing his bit to keep alive the tradition of the 4-course lunch with wine. Dites-moi, qui est le vrai centre de la France?
Vous y êtes, hein. Vous êtes installé. Vous êtes installé au vrai centre de la France.
Unemployment in the Cher is more than 10%. Once upon a time, people would have turned to the Communist Party. These days, many are looking elsewhere.
Les gens qui étaient du Parti communiste ont peut-être été déçus et sont peut-être partis rejoindre un autre parti qui est à l'autre extrémité, qui s'appelle le Front National.
Local polls reflect the picture nationwide, but polls, as we know, can be deceptive. We came across Marie-France de Perronnet, a Fillon supporter trying to give a last-minute boost to the establishment.
I think French are very provocative, but they remain serious, sort of. And at the time of voting, they are more balanced and they think better and they don't explode. So I have good hope. I have good hope. Keep my finger crossed.
For years, La France Profonde has languished on the political periphery. And if Trump and Brexit teach us anything, it is this: don't underestimate the power of a heartland scorn.
Gabriel Gatehouse there. Well, we're joined by 2 journalists who followed French politics closely for many years. Christine Ockrent, who was editor-in-chief of the L'Express, and Pierre Aski is the founding editor of Rue 89, but you know them because we've had them on the show a lot. Right, so normally you end these things by saying, OK, what's your prediction? I want to start by saying, what is your prediction? What is your prediction, Christine?
I wish you wouldn't ask that question. I mean, this campaign has been so full of surprises, and the latest polls do indicate always the same trend, but in such a narrow circle, you know. So Macron is still ahead, Le Pen comes second, but Fillon has gone up a bit. Yeah. Le Pen has gone up a bit since yesterday's attack, but I think too early to tell.
No, Pierre, are you venturing on Macron and Le Pen through to the second round? That's what the polls
say. I mean, that's what the polls say, and normally that's what it should be. But I wouldn't exclude a surprise, because we still have a large section of the population that is undecided, and we see it in our dinner parties, families. people are still asking, what should I vote? You know, and so there is really this uncertainty.
And there's a big thing in the Brexit vote and in the Trump vote was the turnout of people, and sometimes people who were not big, or who didn't usually go out and turn out in large numbers, blue-collar workers, who then did turn out and bigger than pollsters expected. And presumably that benefits Le Pen because they're more committed.
True, but our system is so different. We have 2 rounds. It's a majority vote. It has nothing to do with a referendum, which is, you know, a simple question to a very complex issue, and it's one answer, and it has nothing to do with the American system. So I'd be cautious in comparing, but you are right, the turnout is usually the key. If the turnout is low, that will favor Le Pen, because she has a much more solid constituency. As a base.
Why are the Macron voters, Pierre? Why are they a bit softer? They seem to be less committed. You know, he goes around, he's got these lovely rallies.
Yeah, but you know, Macron is the new kid on the block. You know, I mean, he's not tested. He's got a very limited experience. He's got some aspects of his personality which puzzle people. You know, okay, he's been a banker. He's been with Hollande. He's sometimes got this charismatic way of talking in his meetings. He's got some aspects of his program that are very liberal, others that are very social, very modern. So who is he really? You know, and a lot of people hesitate, and I think people are tempted by Macron because
That's
would be
what has worked for
yes,
him.
it's a new experience. He's got youth, and this country is longing for someone, you know, someone who incarnates the future, you know, and not the past.
Do the old parties, the Socialists and the Republicans, who could quite easily come 4th and 5th, let's not talk too soon, but
which means get out of the scene, which would be an absolute revolution.
Amazing. And do they come back from that? I mean, is that terminal for them? Do they split? Do they?
I think they probably will murder one another, you know, before they get. Oh no, I think seriously, it will be an absolutely bloody scene among the Conservatives and among the Socialists.
You know, there's one thing interesting, that when Macron launched his group, he didn't call it a party; he called it a movement. And I think that's very significant, because I think the party system has exhausted its purpose and its life. And people today want to be involved in politics. People are not out of politics, they're very involved in politics, but they want to take part differently. And I think our old party system has really reached the end of the road.
Sometimes you compare elections, you say this is like the one in 1983 or whatever. This is not like any of them, is it? I mean, this really is Fifth Republic.
This is absolutely unique, and I think there's not only a generational change, but there's indeed a kind of a mix of democratic fatigue, at least with a system as it's been going for years with always the same people, and at the same time a great deal of energy. And a great deal of resilience. Again, I mean, you know, last night Paris was supposed to be on fire. Well, this morning on the Champs-Élysées, first of all, Paris was not on fire. And second, on the Champs-Élysées this morning, people were jogging.
What is so striking, last point, Pierre, the voters here have just got the most fantastic choice. I mean, no one can say there isn't the full spectrum of political viewpoints.
Yes. 11. That's right. Yes, and that's one of the issues, is that you have a choice that is different from the usual lines. It's not just right and left, and which we've had for 30 years. We are unhappy with the right, we vote for the left, and then the other way around. This time the dividing line is rather different. It's also Europe, it's open country, closed country, and that crisscrosses every political family, and that makes this election different and also more crucial.
You know what? The clock has struck midnight in Paris.
We're not allowed anymore.
Not allowed to say a word.
What a relief.
That's all we have time for. The estimated result of the round one vote will be at 7 p.m. UK time on Sunday. It's not an exit poll. You'll get the count at 8, at 7. It's sample counts from representative polling stations, and they'll call the result as long as it isn't too close. But they've no experience of a four-way race like this, so who knows. Naga, back to you in London.
Evan, thanks very much. Get ready for it. UK election fever is coming to a town near you, or it already has if you were in Swindon, Bristol or Cardiff today, where Jeremy Corbyn kicked off his campaign outside London. This afternoon, the eagle-eyed may even have spotted an extra spring in his step. Close ally Len McCluskey was re-elected as leader of Unite. If Labour is to succeed, it needs to pick up tens of seats from the Conservatives. So what is the winning strategy going to be? Our correspondent, David Grossman, joined the Labour leader as he began his 7-week charm offensive.
Morning, Mr Corbyn.
Morning, lovely to see you all.
Are you ready for the fight?
Absolutely, that's why we're here.
Jeremy Corbyn is beginning the fight of his life. Rarely has a leader of the opposition started a campaign with the arithmetic so steeply stacked against him.
The choice of this seat for the Labour leader's first campaigning stop outside London is a statement of intent. South Swindon is a bellwether seat. It's gone to the governing party in every election since it was created. Indeed, all the seats Jeremy Corbyn is going to visit today are currently in the hands of the Conservatives.
Good morning, Swindon.
Mr Corbyn's themes are on class sizes, the minimum wage, 0 hours contracts and free school meals. The queue for selfies afterwards shows that supporters can't get enough. But even activists struggle to explain why this offer might win over Conservative voters.
Well, you have to get the message out there. You have to understand why they would have voted Conservative last time. I'm not sure why they did. Me personally, I don't understand why that would be. But if you offer policies that people can get behind, like the minimum living wage, free school meals, it's policies for all parts of the population of Swindon.
Hi, how you doing? Hello.
The next stop is a children's centre in Bristol North West. To win this seat, psephologists estimate that Labour would need a national lead over the Tories of 3%. To put that into context, they're currently about 20 points behind.
We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one.
Fitting then that the book Mr Corbyn is reading from is We're Going on a Bear Hunt. It's all about overcoming a series of seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Mud.
Mr Corbyn doesn't need to wade through swishy grass or deep mud, but he does have some formidable obstacles to negotiate. In order for him to have the same slim majority that Theresa May enjoys today, he'd need to win 100 seats. And if we look at who has those 100 most winnable seats for Labour right now, 1 is Green, 2 are Plaid Cymru, 3 are Lib Dem, 9 are SNP, but a whopping 85 are currently in Conservative hands.
How can you convince people who voted Conservative in seats like this to vote Labour when Ed Miliband couldn't and Gordon Brown before him?
Well, we represent what are really very core values of this country. Justice, fairness, equality, equality of opportunity for everybody, health service that works for all, education services properly funded, not having to rely on collections to run the schools.
The final event of the day is an open-air speech in Cardiff North, a seat again that the Conservatives currently hold and one that Labour hasn't won since 2005. Although it's not a bad-sized crowd for almost no notice on a Friday afternoon, building real support enough to take a seat like this is going to be a big challenge for Labour.
For some local residents, a visit from Mr Corbyn is more a curiosity than an attraction.
Do you think he's somebody who can connect with Conservative voters in a seat like this?
No way. No.
Why not?
I just don't think he's got the right ideas for the people, to be honest. I don't know, he's far to the left.
It's true, Labour did win this seat in the Welsh Assembly election of last year, but Jeremy Corbyn certainly didn't have a starring role in that campaign.
Every election is difficult. You never take anything for granted. There's a lot of work to do between now and general election day. I've said there's a mountain to climb, but mountains can be climbed, and today is the start of that journey.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Winning Conservative seats is clearly a huge challenge, particularly since the polls suggest Labour could struggle to hang on to many of the seats it already holds. Tomorrow, Jeremy Corbyn is due to start Labour's defensive campaign in Labour seats in the northwest of England.
So, while Jeremy Corbyn was wooing the crowds in Cardiff, Theresa May kicked off her campaign trail in Maidenhead, her own constituency. The Prime Minister put a marker down too today, attempting to snuff out speculation over the government's commitment to the foreign aid budget. It will remain at 0.7% of national income, to be spent, in her words, in the most effective way. However, when asked about the so-called triple lock on the state pension, which guarantees an annual rise of at least 2.5%, Mrs May declined to confirm it would remain. Tonight, Philip Hammond has also hinted that he wants to scrap the Conservative Party's promise not to raise taxes. So how much will these non-Brexit issues shape her campaign? Joining me now is David Aranovich, who's the columnist for The Times, Ava Vidal, comedian and commentator, Tom Newton-Dunn, political editor for The Sun. Good evening. Welcome to you all. I thought it would be quite interesting to start off with just some of the reaction of the front pages that we're going to be seeing tomorrow. The Financial Times has said fears of a Hammond tax bombshell. The Sun, the headline, and you'll be aware of this, pay and dismay. Tories ready to hit the white van man. And the Daily Mirror is saying the Tories' VAT bombshell, picking up on Philip Hammond suggesting that he's going to drop this 2015 pledge not to hike taxes. What do you make of this reaction?
I think it's a perfectly natural one of newspaper editors to look at some pretty big policy announcements today from both Philip Hammond and Theresa May, also policy signalling. Philip Hammond saying, we're going to rip up that promise we made only 2 years ago to not raise all these big taxes, and we may end up raising these taxes. And also, potentially, we're going to drop the triple lock on pensions, which means pensions may go down. They're seismic great events, and they deserve their place all over the front pages.
He hasn't quite said he's going to rip it up, though, has he? He said he's concerned about certain taxes constraining the ability of the government to manage the economy flexibly.
And I think when you translate that into real people's language, it means rip it up.
Ava?
Yeah, I mean, I'm astounded, actually. I didn't expect the papers to take this turn so quickly, in terms of they were pretty much all supporting Theresa May and supporting the Conservatives. At one point, I was really despairing. Is there anything that these people can do that they're not going to gloss over? So it's interesting, actually, the way it's being reported.
How significant is it, the reaction to Philip Hammond and the foreign aid budget so early on?
The front page of my paper, The Times, actually carries a story saying that Donald Trump is going to give the EU preference over Britain for a trade deal. So I have to say that I regard these things as minor players in what is actually or should be the major issue of the election.
Which you're saying it should be Brexit.
We're getting them out of the way early. I mean, the foreign aid one is quite interesting, because one of the questions you ask is, who is Theresa May? Is she a kind of small-town conservative who wants to keep immigrants out and not pay foreign aid and so on, because sometimes she seems a bit like that? Or is she actually a kind of globalising big business conservative, a bit more like the others, like Philip Hammond probably would be, in which case you want to think about your responsibilities in the world, and foreign aid's a big important part of that. Tim Montgomery, the Conservative blogger, said today that actually he knew that Ruth Davidson, the Tory leader in Scotland, was a major influence in Theresa May on keeping the 0.7%. But think about that Bill Gates speech yesterday. Now tell me that Bill Gates didn't know that Theresa May was going to do this. In other words, she didn't take the decision, I don't think, because Bill Gates made the speech. He made the speech to give emphasis to the position that she was about to announce.
I would say that's possibly a conspiracy too far.
It's not a conspiracy.
Well, it is if you don't believe it. I don't think Bill Gates and Number 10 talked to her. Theresa May cancelled a meeting with Bill Gates the day before yesterday, which is a pretty good idea. They don't particularly best buddies. On 0.7%, the devil is always in the detail. And I have a sneaking suspicion that this one isn't quite over yet, because 0.7% is only 0.7% if you go along with the OECD definition of precisely what you give to who. And I think the government may just end up blurring this. So technically, they'll be keeping the target, but actually some more money may be going towards the MOD. So in fact, the target...
OK, let's talk about what domestic policy, these kind of policy statements or pledges mean to the shape of the election. Because up until... maybe now, it was considered a Brexit election. Yeah. Is that fair? And is this changing?
That's what they were trying to make us believe, it was a Brexit election, while they were sort of sneaking things under the table. So I think it's quite good that it's actually, people are noticing, going, hold on a second. I think there's probably going to be a U-turn, like there was on,
a U-turn?
I think there'll be a U-turn on the 0.7. I think they're not going to go through with it. Once they've seen a reaction like this, I don't think that the Tories are going to go through with it. They can't afford to be alienating their own base at this point.
But can Theresa May afford, if you think
Well,
this could be the case, can she afford to do such a
I
U-turn
just say
ahead
she
of
can.
Brexit
I mean,
negotiations?
not only does she actually have to shore up centrist support and so on, she doesn't also necessarily want to seem like a complete right-winger. Given that UKIP has more or less collapsed, there isn't some kind of great threat off to her right. The big threat that all the parties face is, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn apart, the Tories actually face is low turnout. That's really the big problem. I mean, we might come later to the question of expectation of result and so on. It may seem a bit early at the beginning of a 7-week campaign, but nevertheless we can do that. And I've returned to the point. All this is persiflage. It's all kind of little bits of nitpicking detail.
Well, that's what happens in an election campaign.
No, it is if you concentrate on it. The biggest question is whether we, as media and so on, focus down on the thing that really matters, which is what her negotiating position is actually going to be on Europe. Because
okay, and that's on Europe,
but I do how much money we've got for everything.
Okay, and I do want to focus just on the election, the UK election at the moment. I mentioned Len McCluskey being re-elected for Unite as well. How significant is that for him in terms of his standing? He's supported by the party, but it's not reflected yet in the electorate.
No, and I think it won't have any effect on the election itself because Unite, quite frankly, were always going to be funding the Labour Party for this general election, whoever was in charge of Unite. It gives him a confidence boost. There are certain big theories amongst Labour MPs that even if Jeremy Corbyn loses this general election, as it looks like he may, he'll stay on. And getting Jeremy Corbyn out of that job, even if he's presided over a catastrophic event for the Labour Party, may indeed be very hard. It'll be even harder with Len McCluskey still in charge of Unite.
Can you do it?
Can Jeremy win? I think actually, because I have actually been outdoor stepping and going and speaking to people, I think there is going to be a bit more of an upset than people think. They are saying that Jeremy is useless, he's not going to win, he has no support. I have been on the road with him. I've seen people's reaction to him. He's getting people interested in politics who are not. And I think at this point it is so important for the Labour Party to pull together and stop this infighting and all this, because that, when you actually speak to people, that is the thing that is putting people off Labour. The other problem that the Labour Party might have is a lot of Labour supporters are pro-Remain and they're very disappointed. And I've been speaking to some people who are going, well, you know, we've got no choice, we're going to have to go to the Liberal Democrats, which is ridiculous. I mean, that's like going back to a cheating boyfriend because, you know, they last time they campaigned on the student fees and they just completely turned around.
Quick one, Tom. Does this front page mean that the Sun's backing Jeremy Corbyn?
That may be a little bit of a premature conclusion.
Go on, do it. Do it.
Ask the editor, but I think it's unlikely.
OK, thanks very much. Thank you all for joining us. Now, before we finish, 70 years ago, the Italian writer and Holocaust survivor Primo Levi published If This Is a Man. It's a memoir of his incarceration in Auschwitz. To mark the anniversary, Philippe Sands and A.L. Kennedy, in collaboration with the South Bank Centre, have curated a special event to be held a week on Sunday at the Royal Festival Hall, featuring readings from the book. The actor Samuel West will take part. He's here tonight to read the book's epigraph. Good night.
You who live safe in your warm houses, you who find, returning in the evening, hot food and friendly faces, consider if this is a man who works in the mud, who does not know peace, who fights for a scrap of bread, who dies because of a yes or a no. Consider if this is a woman without hair and without name, with no more strength to remember, her eyes empty and her womb cold like a frog in winter. Meditate that this came about. I commend these words to you. Carve them in your hearts, at home, in the street, going to bed, rising. Repeat them to your children. Or may your house fall apart. May illness impede you. May your children turn their faces from you.
Hello there. We've seen some very